Okay, we're continuing with the book Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes by me, Pete Rogers. It's available at Amazon. We're doing letter H now. Franz Joseph Haydn, the composer. And he said, when my work does not advance, I return to the oratory and I say my rosary, and then ideas immediately come to me. You know, a lot of the greatest composers and geniuses, Beethoven, etc., they get ideas from walking. And of course, we get them when we sleep. You know, you wake up in the morning, you have a great idea. You should always have a pen and a piece of paper nearby. You can write stuff down. Lots of great ideas happen that way. I always have a note card and a pen with me. So if I'm driving at a stoplight, I'll write down an idea. I'm always listening to an audio book. If I'm at work and somebody tells me a great idea, I'll write it down so I don't want to forget it. You know, if I come across whatever useful information that I think I can work into a book or a video or something that's going to be useful, you always grab it. So you just grab a little knowledge each day. That's how you learn, a little bit each day, and then it seems like no big deal, but you do that every day and it adds up. Okay, S. Hayakawa, he said, in a very real sense, people who have read good literature have lived more than people who cannot or will not read. It is not true that we have only one life to live. If we can read, we can live as many more lives and as many kinds of lives as we wish. Yeah, you read a book, you read Charles Dickens, it takes you back to the mid-1800s. Same thing with Victor Hugo, Fyodor Dostoevsky. All right, next is Friedrich von Hayek, one of the great scholars of economics. He said, there is all the difference in the world between treating people equally, giving them equal opportunity and chance, and attempting to make them equal. It's actually evil to try to make people equal. How could you make me equal to a retarded person? Just beat me up, okay? You can't make people equal. People are unequal in their abilities. That's just a fact of life. Some guy who's 7 foot tall, he's going to be a better basketball player than some guy who's just average height. That's just a fact of life. And there's differences in physical and in intellectual gifts. It's a fact of life. Okay, when people are treated unequal in order to make them equal, that's actually quite evil. Emergencies have always been the pretext on which the safeguards of individual liberty have been eroded. Yeah, watch out when they say there's a crisis, because what that means is they're going to take your rights away in the name of the crisis. So always be very suspicious of that. Okay, Hayek continues, if socialists understood economics, they wouldn't be socialist. And you'll see a lot of overlap between Hayek's work and that of Ayn Rand, for example, and Milton Friedman. Okay, he says, for example, Ayn Rand says the difference between socialism and communism is the difference between suicide and murder. And she's absolutely right. Okay, Hayek continues, what our generation has forgotten is that the system of property is the most important guarantee of freedom for those who own property, but scarcely less for those who do not. Capitalism is not only a better form of organizing human activity than any deliberate design, but it is also the indispensable condition for just keeping the population alive, which already exists in the world. I regard the preservation of what is known as the capitalist system of free markets and private ownership of the means of production as an essential condition for the very survival of mankind. Okay, that is true. And Ayn Rand had said it, and Milton Friedman said it, and anybody who really studied economics and is honest. Capitalism rewards you for making more effort, for helping other people. Okay, that's good. And when I say capitalism, I mean, like Ayn Rand had implied, laissez-faire capitalism. Not a rigged game where two corporations are fixing the prices and partnering with each other or laundering money through fake modern art, stuff like that. But a real system that says, look, if you own a restaurant and you provide good service, you'll get more customers, you can expand the restaurant. Versus in communism, let's say they give the guy $100,000 budget for the month. Well, then he wants to provide as little service as possible so he can keep more of that $100,000. So it punishes good service and good food. Okay, continuing here. Money. Well, capitalism created the possibility of employment. Money is one of the greatest instruments of freedom ever invented by man. It is money by which an existing society opens an astounding range of choice to the poor man. Yeah, basically it's one of the fairest trades you'll get. Ayn Rand, anybody who studied economics knows that. It's a fair deal. You say, okay, you do this work, you'll get $20. Okay. It's a lot better than slavery. Okay, I read this book by a guy named Haydyn. I forgot his name, and this isn't in my regular book, of course. Like a lot of these quotes aren't, but this is just one where he talked about science, how you'd have two philosopher scholars arguing about the number of teeth in a horse's mouth, and then if one of them says, why don't we go outside, there's a horse docked outside the building, and count his teeth, they would beat the guy and yell at him. And that's a common thing. It's still like that in modern medicine. Okay, here's another quote. He says, he said that's what happened to a monk who said, why don't we count the teeth? Galileo, when he looked through his telescope, the others didn't believe him. He said, why don't you look for yourself? But they would not look in his telescope. Okay, Newton, saw a rock on the ground. He picked it up, and Newton threw the rock. And he looked at the rock. He saw it had a curved trajectory before it fell to the earth. And he got the idea, if the rock could be thrown harder, then it would fall in a curve, but the earth is round, it could keep falling around the world, and then perhaps it could stay in orbit. Okay, and later on we're going to come to a quote by Hazlitt, and he said, Newton, many of us saw the apple fall, but Newton's the only one who asked why. And I like that quote. That's going to be by William Hazlitt in just a moment here. I like that because a lot of the best ideas, they simply come from sort of a courageous application of common sense, saying what causes hypertension? What causes diabetes? That's how you figure stuff out. You go to the books, you'll just see, here's how you sell a drug for this disease. But if you start thinking about it in that basic, simple way and then read with that goal, so whatever your question is, that's how you figure out things that will astonish people that you figured them out, is starting real basic like that. Okay, Henry Hazlitt, he lived from 1894 to 1993. He says, the gospel of Karl Marx can be summed up in a single sentence: to hate the man who is better off than you are, and to never admit that his success may be due to his own efforts. What I actually think, the Communist Manifesto and whatnot, is that it's a system, it's a con artist system by which a few people control a large number of people. You centralize everything, and then you can control a whole bunch of other people. But you can't do that so easily if you're not centralized, because then you'd have to have this big administrative network all over the place. So it's a way, to take everything away from the little guy. Christianity and capitalism and the Constitution, they build up the little guy. Okay, communism smashes down the little guy. It's evil. And that's why socialism, it pretends to have the moral high ground, but it's completely evil. It's all about bringing back slavery, okay? But most people are so stupid they can't recognize that. Okay, Henry Hazlitt continues, a man with a scant vocabulary will almost certainly be a weak thinker. The richer and more copious one's vocabulary, and the greater one's awareness of fine distinctions and subtle nuances of meaning, the more fertile and precise is likely to be one's thinking. Yeah, reading makes you smarter. You develop your vocabulary from reading and from having intellectual conversations. And for most of us, when we're growing up, there's no one to have an intellectual conversation with except your parents. And then if you're lucky, some friends as you get older. Okay, William Hazlitt, he was mostly English, part Irish writer, and he wrote a lot of essays and art criticism and whatnot. So here he goes. He says, when a thing ceases to be a subject of controversy, it ceases to be a subject of interest. The garb of religion is the best cloak for power. And nowadays, the religion of modern America and most of the Western world is what you would call atheistic Darwinism. It pretends to be scientific, but it's really a religion, okay? It can't explain the origin of life. It can't explain macroevolution. It just pretends to be scientific in that way, but it's not, okay? And then regular so-called scientism, atheistic Darwinism, communism, socialism, they go, we go by science. But when they say science, they don't mean proving whether or not something's true or not. What they mean is they have a paid expert who says what they're told to say. That's what the so-called science is. So for science in that sense, I draw it with the letter S as in the dollar sign for science. It's paid for. Okay, bought and paid for. And now they're trying to pretend that AI is some type of God. That's all BS. What they're going to use AI for is different forms of surveillance. They're going to use it to track dissent and things like that. And it's complete horseshit. It has no personality. It has no soul. It has no creativity. It's simply going to seek consensus. And what is consensus going to be? Consensus is going to be whatever the ruler damn well says it is. Okay, so it's a joke. It's not going to get. And then people say, oh, AI is going to write. A good writer has creativity, personality, voice, honesty, pursues the truth, nuance, humor. AI doesn't have any of those things. It's again going to seek consensus. Okay, if it seeks consensus on writing, most writing is bland and boring and pale and conformist. So it's going to suck. And so that's why only if somebody sucks at writing would AI be an improvement on the writing. But anybody who's half decent, they're going to write better than AI. Okay, so William Hazlitt continues. Honesty is part of eloquence. Oh yeah, and again, getting back to this idea of religion as a cloak for power. The religion of the left is completely evil. What it seeks is to bring back slavery. What it seeks is, Jenna, side of Christians, okay? It's completely evil. It's a culture of death, aborting babies, LGBTQ instead of families. It hates anything that produces a baby. It hates Christianity. It hates religion. It hates life. It wants cannibalism, adrenochrome, trafficking, all that stuff. Okay, William Hazlitt. Honesty is part of eloquence. We persuade others by being earnest ourselves. Yeah, and that's what Jerry Spence said. He's that great lawyer. He never lost a case. He was brilliant. He said, honesty is the best form of presenting information because it carries with it a spontaneity, okay? And people sense that. And so they're more likely to get it if they're tuned into the nuance of it. Dandyism is a species of genius. And I think that's a funny quote because I can remember guys when I was in high school who had sort of a dandy style about them. And they were very funny and clever. And Oscar Wilde, of course, comes to mind as the great dandy of the 1800s. Okay, when he was in his prime, man, he was great. Okay, wit is the rarest quality to meet amongst the people of education, but it is the most common amongst the uneducated. There's something funny about that too. Like I hang around with a lot of doctors and a lot of nurses too, and especially the doctors. There's almost no joking. I wish they would joke more. But when I hang around with techs, I sometimes hang around with techs. They're very funny and very clever and very kind of smart aleck. And it reminds me of being back in high school. And they're fun. Okay, William Hazlitt continues. Science is the desire to know causes. Yeah, that's real knowledge in a field, to know what causes what. That's what's really useful. Medical students are primarily educated in, here's a long list of, the 10 symptoms of lupus, the 10 symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis, but they never learn what causes it. And that's the most important thing because once you know what causes it, then you avoid the thing that causes it, and you got a chance to cure it. That's how it is for all diseases, but that doesn't get taught in medical schools or in residency. Okay, Hazlitt continues, the rules and models destroy genius and art. I disagree with that. You learn by studying what the great masters had done, and then you gradually innovate once you develop the capacity. As is our confidence, so is our capacity. Okay, the path of genius is free and its own. If we wish to know the force of genius, we should read Shakespeare. If we wish to see the insignificance of human learning, we may study only his commentators. The art of life is to know how to enjoy a little and to endure very much. Yeah, there's some truth in that. You got to be resilient because you're always going to get pounded down and have sadness. So you have to be able to bounce back up. Christianity helps you to do that. It gives you an optimism, gives you a hope, a faith. Versus I've seen a lot of atheists. They don't have hope, and so they suffer a setback and they just go screw it and they give up. Okay, that's why most of the greatest people have been Christians because they got that faith to go and do great things. Okay. The art of pleasing consists in being pleased. You know more of a road by having traveled it than by all the conjectures and descriptions in the world. The best kind of conversation is that which may be called thinking out loud. Yeah, that's what you can do with your friends. That's why if you want to be a good writer, write like you're talking to an intelligent friend. The art of conversation is the art of hearing as well as being heard. That's one thing I notice when I talk to smart doctors. They listen. They give you a chance to talk. You say what you have to say. They say what they have to say. And that's good. I like talking to them. I know some real smart doctor buddies. And that's how they are. Versus I've often had to talk to young, smarmy, impatient, impulsive teenagers. Okay? And they're not like that. They think they know everything. They always want to react, overact. I think it's from all that processed food. Paleo, keto, carnivores are like that. But it's very difficult to teach them anything. They think they know everything, and they don't wait, and they don't listen. So it's hard for them to learn anything. Okay, let's continue with William Hazlitt. A gentle word, a kind look, a good-natured smile can work wonders and accomplish miracles. Yeah, that was how my mother was. Oh, sorry about that. And I saw that when I was growing up because we'd have these big parties at our house a bunch of times every year. And my mom was the hostess who would walk around and talk to everybody. And if anybody was shy and alone, like some kid, some cousin, some friend of a friend, she would always gather them and she would know who to bring them over and introduce them so they'd have a good conversation. And wherever she went, she was cracking jokes, making everybody happy. And I'm like, gosh, even though my dad was a psychiatrist, my mom understood people better than my psychiatrist father did. And I'm like, gee, that is the way a person should live. Everywhere she went, she was doing nice things, cracking jokes, and making everybody happy. And that's why she was like revered almost like a saint during her lifetime. Okay. Mother's Day, we'd have over 100 people at our house. I go to the tennis club and I would meet some random person I never saw before. They go, "Oh, you're her son. I love her." And they did they had to know was that I was her son. And all of a sudden, I got the red carpet rolled out because she was so good to so many people. She's on the board of directors of an orphanage, a minister of care. She adopted a whole bunch of kids, just for as long as they needed to. The parents were having problems. She says, "You come live with us." She would do that routinely. Okay, let's see. We continue with William Hazlitt. He said, we must overact our part in some measure in order to produce any effect at all. And that kind of reminds me, I forget who wrote about it, the difference between writing and speaking. When you're speaking, you can change your tone of voice, your cadence, your loudness, your all kinds of features, the pitch. You can use hand gestures, facial gestures. But when you're writing, all you've got is the words. So in a sense, you almost, in order to generate some emotional effect when you write, you almost have to overdo it a little bit. And I actually think that's part of good writing, good author voice, to get that emotion across, because it's the emotion that's most memorable. As Ezra Pound said, it is only emotion that endures. We're more tuned into emotion than we are to reason, so it's good to have both. And of course, in a story form, the narrative, because that's also where, like I've heard another quote, that we're story processors more than logic processors. Okay, continuing with William Hazlitt. Cunning is the art of concealing our own defects and discovering other people's weaknesses. An attempt to effect by concealment when we cannot do openly. Okay, that's part of cunning. A nickname is the heaviest stone that the devil can throw at a man. Oh yeah, that was kind of funny. You've seen that in political campaigns. When one candidate throws a funny nickname at the other one, that kind of sticks pretty well quite often and is entertaining. Summarizes a lot in a phrase. Okay, ignorance of the world leaves one at the mercy of its malice. Yes, that's true. It's dangerous to walk into a hospital unless you have some sense of why you're there and what you're doing. If you think you can win, you can win. Faith is necessary for victory. Yeah, it's a good way. Christian optimism and faith. The more we do, the more we can do. The more a man writes, the more he can write. Yeah, I've seen that as soon as I write one book, I'm like, oh gosh, another book would be perfect that I really don't have time to fit in here, but it would go perfect. That's how you get an idea for the next book, is by finishing one book. As soon as you get about halfway through one book, you can't wait to do the next book. And that motivates you to finish this one. Millions saw the apple fall, but Newton asked why. Words are the only things that last forever. That's another thing about words, too. And it's another reason why I like writing books, is because look at the ancient Greeks. All of their paintings are lost. Most of their sculptures are lost or broken. Luckily, the Romans made copies of a lot of them. The great building, the Parthenon, is in ruins. But what still persists in relatively well-preserved form is the Iliad and the Odyssey and the other books of ancient Rome. The Peloponnesian War by Thucydides, the histories, by Hesiod, Theogony of the Gods, okay? By Hesiod, Herodotus, the history. Okay, so you got all that stuff, the Republic of Plato, much of Aristotle, even though we lost a lot of Aristotle. Anyways, so words live. They can delete all this stuff off the internet tomorrow, but the book, if somebody's got the hard copy of the book, they can potentially make that last. And if you've got some Irish monks to copy it, it can last forever. So anyways, that's it for today. Hope that was helpful.